A former drug addict once said, "These drugs are like demons living inside of you." Now, the irony of drug abuse is that while getting high on these pills, or whatever it literally pulls you out of your high place in reality. So you hear A students tell their stories of how they dropped out, or people who were initially doing so well suddenly falling behind the lines. Now, this is a terrible menace, and the need to put an end to it cannot be overemphasized. Well, we'll go straight to the conversation, but before then, let me welcome my guest. I have my studio guest with me, Dr. Dokun Adedeji, a member of the Special Purpose Committee, National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, joining us from Lagos. Thank you so much, Dr. Dokun, for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. All right, we also have joining us Tanaka Lawrence Zambe Makoni, a grants personnel and young people mental health trust, all the way from Harare in Zimbabwe. Thank you so much, Tanaka, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tosuna. It's a real pleasure to join you.
It's a pleasure. All right, gentlemen, we'll go to the conversation, but in the meantime, we need to take a look at what the youth are saying. It's a youth show, and we want to see what their opinion is regarding drug abuse. But in the meantime, let's just have the conversation. We'll definitely take a look at the Vox Pop later. So, Dr. Doku, I'm going to start with you. Why do you think drug abuse is so rampant?
There are quite a number of reasons for this. The availability and affordability as well. And also, I believe the kind of value decadence that we now have, nothing matters anymore. People don't know what good looks like anymore. And there's a lot of permissiveness in the society that allows it. And for as long as also it's seen as a lucrative business that people can put so much money and maybe a little money and get so much, and then it makes it possible for people to bring in drugs. And not even only that, the opportunity that people can concoct their own drugs, even from things that are so innocuous that you never believe can keep somebody high. So I think I agree with you completely in your introduction that this is something that we have to work on. It's extremely devastating. I mean, from my personal experience working with them, I tell you, the figures are not smiling. They're frightening, and this is just the time to begin to do something about it.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Dokun. You did mention permissiveness, and that's going to bring me to Tanaka. Tanaka, please confirm that you can hear us once again.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you so much, Tosuna.
All right. Speaking of permissiveness, it's beginning to become more obvious that the society is in one way or the other encouraging this kind of habit. I said that because sometimes we seem to glorify anything that talks about such behavior, like songs. We hear some songs that they literally mention drugs, and these songs are allowed to be played in public places, in clubs, at bars. We also see people living, having lifestyles that depict those of drug addicts. Some people even want to be like these people, having these kind of lifestyles, their dress sense, even influencers talking about drugs in their skits and all that. We criticize all of this. We embrace all of these things, but we seem to criticize the act itself. Isn't the society playing a huge role in permitting these kind of things?
Yes, well, what I can say is that indeed the society is contributing. Because when you're talking about an individual, youth is coming from a home, and a home has got people, and also not just a home. And it's coming from different institutions like schools, everything is being, like in schools, like every situation takes place, like even music, you can talk about music. You can talk about parents, like at home. A certain youth in one house may see his or her parents, they are maybe smoking cigarettes, drinking beer. And at the end of the day, you realize that the youth will end up normalizing the situation, not being in a position to identify what's wrong and what's right. So at the end of the day, realize that the way these drugs are affecting youth, or the way these drugs are starting to affect the youth, is sort of like we can look at it from an intersectional point of view. Like there are different forms. Like for example, Tosina, you talked about music. Music is also another thing. Like for example, also we realize cultural practices. We realize there are certain cultures which actually see, like for example, or smoking as part of their religion, also brewing beer. So these are the ways we see that youth are being affected. I can see maybe in that sense, that's where we can see drugs affecting the youth.
Still talking about permission, do we have strong enough laws that prohibits people from dealing drugs, trafficking drugs, and do we follow up with it when these people are caught?
Let me be quite honest with you. We have enough laws. Particularly right now that General Amara is in charge, they've been fortified by the level of activities that they're doing. But the thing is this, we have said, some of us are beginning to say, as is being globally said, that punishment is not the primary source of control, particularly amongst users, young people. But if you get dealers, barons, yes, you can deal with them full extent of the law. But the extremity of it, or say, oh, death penalty, those are not punitive. Those are just reactive. I agree with you about laws, but I think where we're getting to now is not necessarily about the laws, but about stopping a demand, the demand for use.
Yeah.
Supply will always be there, I can guarantee you. For as long as the drug business is lucrative and is available and you can go get it and make a lot of money, people will supply. But efforts are now going on in NDLA, as much as I know, that interdiction is still there, but there's a lot of drug demand reduction activities so that people can get aware. We go around the schools, the institutions, the workplaces, the churches and others, so that people can understand the dangers inherent in abuse and then the consequences. And then, you know, when people now know a lot about it, you can make informed choices. Is this something I want to do and destroy myself, or something that I want to refrain from doing? I think that is the stage we must get to now to help. But the laws are there. But before, I must confess to you that it depends on the interpretation of the judge. Sometimes it can be lenient depending on the latitude that he has.
Yeah.
But now we'll begin to say, look, you cannot touch these things with a kid's gloves. You need to deal with it in a manner, and then also confiscate all the material things they made in the process of trading and illicit trafficking. As long as it gets more entrenched, and many more Nigerians have this level of awareness that we need to work at it, the better for all of us.
Right.
This is not one agency work or multi-agency. It is collective, which all of us must be involved in one way or the other.
Okay, Dr. Dokun, let's be very frank with ourselves, right? These dealers understand the market. And I said that because you would hardly see older people or, drug cartels coming to individuals to sell the drugs to them. They use the youths to influence the youth, and these youths are people who always clamor for jobs, they want more employment. So anything that can get money in their pocket, you can't tell them that it's wrong. So if as a drug dealer, I approach youths and tell them to sell to other youths, use and let them see you using, and they buy from you. How do we now convince these people that these things you're doing is wrong, but there are no job opportunities, but you have to stop this? It's like we need to replace a bad with a good. But in the situation where there is no job opportunity, how do we convince them to stop?
The thing, in Nigeria, we always look for the easy way out.
Yeah.
Even if everybody in Nigeria works, it does not stop the use of drugs.
Yeah.
It's not, people work who use drugs because they have the funds to service their appetite.
Yeah.
The important thing that we must begin to look at is let people understand the consequences of what they're doing. Let me say a dealer, for instance, that if you make money, look, there was a time I was going to a particular joint, and there was this dealer in a very good environment, he was selling, so I called him. And I said, look, what you're doing is dangerous. Your house is AC, you sell through the window. You have sons. Someday, they will get into it. Oh, he said, no. But I tell you, 2 years after I was looking for me, his two sons were in drugs. People forget that life itself is a boomerang.
Yeah.
Whatever you sow, you will reap.
Yeah.
People cannot deal in this destroying people and think they will be excluded from the consequences of it. But saying this, we sometimes we zero on youth. It's good, but it's not true. A survey was done in 2017 by UNODC. The result was probably in 2018. And the survey covered between age 15 and 64. They also found that people in that age use. For instance, people in the offices, they get themselves together, and lunchtime they use. They're not young people.
Yeah.
as like young. But I agree with you. Young people can be more prone to use because of the level of activities they get involved in.
Yeah, and
Disco,
influence.
exactly. And you know, one of the greatest issue that influences the perpetuation of this use is the influencers.
Yes.
The, as you mentioned, the artists, the musician,
Yes.
They
make it look cool.
They make it look cool. You see, I tell people, one example I always give, you know, the gentleman who advertised Marlboro cigarette, you know, it was glamorous, he threw a lasso caught a cow or something. Nobody said thereafter that he died from the consequences of lung cancer. And until we begin to impose consequences upon people who make it easy, like people who sell alcoholic drinks, I ask them, why don't you use your product to advertise? Your product is somebody who falls in the gutter. Your product is somebody who is misbehaving. You don't use them, you use footballers, you use successful people.
Yeah.
So you give an erroneous impression that as long as I do that, I can be like this. It's not true.
Yeah.
Also give the corollary of people who use this and destroy themselves, and then let people then be able to say, look, you put it on cigarette, smoking kills. So if everybody knows. If you now choose to smoke, you know it's a decision you took.
Knowing full well the consequences.
Absolutely. So the thing is, the work of eradication or reduction of use has to be collective and must be multi-pronged in the sense that it has to be this. We go to school, go to young people, get, maybe, I don't know this, the organization agency in charge of it. Why do we play their music? Why do we show them on TV? Why do we glamorize the wrong things? When we know that young people that are impressionable, until we all come to that understanding. And, you know, they must see, I mean, if you look at, but let me talk about Nigeria. You see somebody 20, somebody dying, and they say, I read when they say accidental drug overdose. What is accidental about drug overdose?
Yeah.
You know, so, and I like what you guys are doing, throwing the light on this thing. The more people like you do this, I volunteered many times to take many of you to the joints with hidden cameras. Come and see people. Regular guys like me who went to school, doctors, lawyers, architects. You see them in the joint. But because we read about it, we externalize it until we see it on a personal level. It is then we will understand that we have a big job to do.
Right, right. And, you know, talking about censoring, it's funny how in some parts, in most parts of Africa, we tend to censor vulgar words, cuss words, but we don't censor words that literally mention drugs and drug abuse and all that. But anyways, okay, before I come back to Tanaka, we're going to go back now, circle back to check out what the youths are saying about drug abuse, and then we'll be back to continue the conversation. Let's check this out.
Drug abuse is the use of some certain chemicals to cause a pleasurable effect to the brain. Research, according to newsmedical.com, shows that 190 million of the youths are involved around the world in this drug abuse. The effect of drug abuse, first of all, the human brain is wired to make you go back to whatever that makes it feel good. So once you've once been into, or you go into this drug abuse, your brain will cause a sensation that will make you always want to go into drug abuse. And once you are into this drug abuse, it causes you an addiction. And once you are addicted, first thing that happens to you is that as a youth, your sense of judgment will be reduced or impacted or destroyed. Your decision-making ability will be destroyed. Your memory, you no longer can retain something no more as a youth. And lastly, the worst of it is that your ability to learn. And this is why when you see the youths, they no longer have interest to learn anything, because they can no longer learn because they are into drugs. So as a youth, I advise you, stay away from drugs. Thank you.
Drug abuse is an excessive, maladaptive, or addictive use of drugs for non-medical processes or purposes. They just take it non-medically. It's not useful, it's not important. But these drugs are drugs like marijuana, cocaine, you name them. These are drugs that using those marijuana, cocaine, or those ones they call, think, those ones they call colos. There's one they call colos as well. Those ones as well, they can use it, which is not good for the health. They might use it not for the health properly. They just use it just because they want to be high. This is a drug abuse. Most times they use drugs that are not really important for the health, that is not prescribed by a doctor. This is also drug abuse. So drug abuse is the use of any drug. Is the use of any drug that is for non-medical purposes.
Well, those were the opinions of the youth regarding drug abuse. I still have my guest with me, Dr. Dokun, and of course I also have Tanaka. Now, Tanaka, coming to you, do you think with all of these things that we've said that people are scared, willing to give themselves up for treatment, but scared to admit that they have problems, especially with the world that we are in now, where the stigmatization, people looking at you and thinking, oh, what was he thinking? So do you think that people are scared to admit themselves for treatment because of the stigmatization?
Well, thank you so much, Josina. As for me, I actually think that indeed people are actually afraid. You realize that in the society that we are living, there's much stigmatization, labeling, to say whenever someone let's say I'm someone who's more religious or just an average religious person, whenever someone sees someone who's involved in drug or any substance, or even just cigarette, we begin to judge a sin or something like that. So then to talk of the youth that are actually involved in drugs and substance abuse, you realize that whenever we're approaching this situation, we need also to consider that there's need to stop not just the involvement in drugs, but the effects. And in those effects, we're talking about stigmatization, labeling, stereotyping. And how, so in this case, we realize that most youth, they end up just choosing to say, I'm signing this up for life, that I'm doing this for forever or the rest of my life. Because you realize when you're a drug addict, and you realize that when you're around your fellow addicts, you are being treated fairly, like they're sharing you and stuff. But when you're around people who are normal, who are not involved in drugs, they actually say, they actually treat you like labeling you, stigmatizing you. So in this case, then become difficult for you as a youth to say, what should I do? Should I seek help or not seek help? So in approaching, maybe in trying to formulate a solution to this problem, to avoid those people like the youth not to be afraid of seeking help, we should consider using the theoretical methodological application by harm, which is called harm reduction model. It talks about the issues of avoiding harm. In avoiding harm and avoiding harm to the users. So we also need to protect the users whenever coming with a solution. So to the extent that, for example, let's say there's a certain youth who's actually involved in drug abuse in a family. They should come to a point to say they can even sit with the youth. Like even if the youth is smoking a cigarette, they should actually have a conversation, just a conversation, to the extent that at the end of the day, the youth himself or herself will end up judging herself to say, I should stop. Being judged externally actually makes you maybe to retaliate. Like, for example, which was one thing which was mentioned, another thing which was mentioned by Doctor mentioned the issue of trying to put bars to stop with the youth. Whenever someone is stopped something, that someone actually try to retaliate, to do the opposite. So we should actually be more polite in the way. So indeed, the youth are actually afraid. Like, for example, here in Zimbabwe, like the prevalence of crystal meth, this is the drug which is now being taken at a bigger rate, unlike marijuana and other narcotics, but crystal meth is being taken. So most youth are actually, they've got what they call paranoia, one of the effects of drugs. So in this case, they end up being afraid, maybe even to seek help, to the extent that they end up being depressed. And at one point, you realize the numbers of suicidal rates is increasing day by day. And who are to blame? So in this case, this is a pandemic which spares no one. As one author said that the effects of drug abuse have no discrimination. They affect everyone, the users and the non-users. So in this whole together, so we also need to protect the victims, the users. So in this case, I agree that indeed the youth are afraid. Thank you so much, Christina.
All right, Lawrence, thank you so much for that. Now, in the meantime, once again, we're going to check out what people are saying online about the use of drugs. Let's take a look at what the tweets are saying. Now, Zoom Harari says, we have this problem of, okay, apologies, drug abuse. All right. Okay. So it says we have this problem of drug abuse, which is now rampant globally. Therefore, we need to educate our children on the dangers of drug and substance abuse and take them from the streets, make them busy, and make sure that they have something that sustains them than loitering in the street. I mean, that's easy to say, Dr. Dukun. We talked about influence and pressure, but a lot of times it's just easy to say take them from the street, but you can't exactly keep an eye on people that they associate with, you know. All right, let's take a look at more. Ayomide says, all of us listen and trend songs with lyrics that objectify women. That's what we're saying. Promote drug abuse and money at all costs. All of us shocked that the society is in decay and the people are increasingly selfish, opportunistic, greedy, and misogynistic. So basically, you can't have it both ways. You can't criticize the actual behavior and embrace the lifestyle. Now, Altaf says, situation is very alarming and needs to have mass door-to-door campaign to eradicate menace of drug abuse, and everyone needs to be educated in our society. Otherwise, it's going to be a disaster for our youth. And this one says, drug abuse is a symptom of deeper problems. Okay, I think that's all we can take for now. But going back to you, Tanaka. Now, I did ask Dr. Dukun about the laws, especially in Nigeria. I would like to know if it's the same in Zimbabwe. Are the laws regarding drug abuse strong enough, and are there like executions to these laws?
Okay, thank you so much, Josina. When you're here in Zimbabwe, indeed, yes, the laws are there. The laws against drug abuse are there. But nowadays, what is then becoming difficult is that some laws were passed down when the availability of certain drugs which are now available wasn't there. Like, for example, crystal meth. Crystal meth is a drug which came prior COVID-19 here in Zimbabwe. It became prevalent there. So you realize that in the laws that we have, we don't have like the laws, particular laws which are states about which mention is crystal meth, but there are laws which actually talks about drugs like marijuana. So in this case, in its door, yes, our security forces, our police officers are doing, yes, they're doing something. They are acting against what? Doing a war, sort of something like that against drugs. But then you realize, as I said to begin with, there are intersectional factors. For example, in as much, yes, the laws are being championed, but you realize there is like some corruption issues. For example, some drugs are abusers, they have money. As I said, drug effect is no discrimination, which means a rich person also a poor person is involved in drugs. So in the case that a poor or rich person is involved, in as much there are laws, but they can be in a position to bypass, to manipulate the laws using their money. So at the end of the day, that the drug abuser who is like who is well up in terms of his social status and economic status, we end up like manipulating the legal system, not ending up being in jail. And also, when to talk about the laws that we have, yes, in as much we have the laws that actually have certain years of sentencing and even months. But what you realize that we try to maintain our correctional services. Like you realize those in those correctional services, cigarettes are being sold. And you realize the entry to drug abuse, it begins with those drugs which are with you think that are just lenient or are not strong enough, like cigarettes. Cigarettes is a drug. When you're defining drugs, alcohol is a drug. So when you're talking about drug and substance abuse, we are talking about an overdose. And what's become difficult to distinguish is there's a thin line between normal use and overdose. And so what I then advocate is what? Stop doing drugs. So when you talk about the availability of even cigarettes in our correctional services that are being sold there, is then difficult for us to implement even the laws. The laws now became like just toothless bulldogs in that they are ineffective. So also some officers, they are through the media, the reports of media, they're also involved in drug abuse. So it's then difficult for us to implement. Yes, the laws are there, but the question, are the law effective enough? So we then go back to the same point, which is what we need to stop what's causing drugs. The social, economic, political, religious factors they are in play, because if we ignore them, our laws will never be effective. Because the same factors we talk about, social, political, economic, even technological. Nowadays, people are learning about drugs use through media, through the technology. They are googling about it. At one point, I had in my local street, there was one student who made a lab to create those drugs. You see, so they're getting knowledge also through the media, through technological. So we also need to monitor all those channels, talking about the schools, because it also happened during the schools, you met peers. So
all right.
We need to face something like that. Thank you so much.
Okay, Tanaka, thank you so much. Apologies for interrupting you. You were kind of pressed for time. But finally, I would like to ask you, Dr. Dukun, now, in some African countries, speaking of exploitation now, these countries have now become transit points for smuggling drugs, trafficking drugs and all that. And I mean, even recently, the president of Nigeria, Bola Tinubu, did mention at the United Nations gathering that they want to put an end to, Western countries using Africa as a transit point for drug smuggling. Now, with all of these challenges, having these African countries using Nigeria as a case study, if we are a transit point, although they're trying to stop it, for drug smuggling, how easy would it be to get drugs out of our system as a country?
Look, let's be very honest with ourselves. There is no country that can eliminate use of drug or the trafficking of drug. You can try and beat it to the minimum, but you cannot. For as long as it's lucrative and sometimes it's easy. And, it speaks also to corruption. Because for people to bring in drugs into Nigeria, there must be a cartel.
Yeah. And
when there's a cartel, it involves every spectrum of the society. And then so it depends on who brings it in, and it depends on the level of the baron. And if you must know, the people that are top level in drugs are top in government. There was a time, remember the president of Panama, Noriega, who was eventually jailed in America.
Yes.
And also there was a time the head of the naval force in Cape Verde was a kingpin. So you don't get little people to do drugs. So it's like the Boko Haram. For as long as people can benefit from the circumstances of it, it will continue. But the thing to do is to reduce usage, to reduce demand. If the demand is grossly reduced, supply also will be reduced.
Yes.
And then they'll find another way of doing it. But the thing also we must know, we may concentrate on the drugs that are coming. There are drugs that are manufactured here. Nigeria is no more a transit nation. We stopped being a transit nation in 2013. We are now a manufacturing nation because there are some drugs, particularly crystal meth, which is called Miri, is manufactured here. Nigeria has discovered about 30 laboratories where they are manufactured in Nigeria. And people also do their own concoctions at home. Let me give you an example. There's something called zakami seed. It's found in the north. It's a naturally occurring seed, but it has potent psychoactive substances. The same in South, there's something called gegemu. It's like a plant, but this also has psychoactive, like kuskura. Many things that have been concocted here. I'm not sure lately you saw some young people who were using the beverage. They were carrying beverage, and then in that beverage they've concocted, they mix all kinds of things in it.
Inside it.
And then so they will seal it back with hot iron, and then they were selling like cookies. So they do cookies, they do all kinds, they put it in food stuff. So to say you are stamping it out, it will be tough. You know how much NDLA has done, and yet they're still struggling.
Right.
So it's big.
All right, thank you so much. I want to take this time to say thank you so much to Tanaka, our guest from Zimbabwe, and thanks a lot, Dr. Dukun, for joining us as well.
My pleasure.
All right, very quickly, we have some very short but profound quotes regarding drug abuse by people who have gone ahead of us. Here's what they have to say. Well, there you have it, the quotes by people who have gone ahead speaking on drug abuse. Well, this is still Fafanua Africa, and when we come back, we'll be talking about the crisis with the currency differences in different countries of the world, especially in Africa. Do stay with us as we have more to talk about.